Good morning. I'm Zara from Archangel. Hi. Basically, my firm with the Bombay Stock Exchange organizes a talk series called the BSE Reboot. It basically talks about finance, technology, and law. And for the same, today we talk about geopolitical risk for business in 2021. For the same, we have Mr. Prashant Nayak, the Vice President of Walt Disney. We have Ms. Andrea Davis, the Senior Director at Walmart. We have Mr. Brijesh Singh, the renowned author and IG of Maharashtra. And we have Ms. Khushbu Jain, the Advocate of the Supreme Court of India and the founder of ARC Legal. Over to you, Sir Brijesh Singh.
Okay, so guys, this last year has really been a black swan event in everybody's life. So before the start, I and Andrea were discussing how this year totally got like wiped off. By February last year, everybody was imagining that this is not going to come to my country, and by March, everybody had hopes that probably it would be over by August. And today we see no end in sight for this COVID pandemic. Now, in cybersecurity, we talk about threats and we say that, known unknowns. And then there are unknown unknowns. And then there are these black swans. So it's very interesting how risk shapes up our lives and our businesses and our economies. And here we are to talk about geopolitical risk. There is a very interesting article by Time magazine, which basically catalogs risks and geopolitical risk in 2021. It's been done by some Eurasia group, which is probably a think tank or a consultancy, and they have factored everything. So they talk about major risks and the probability, of these risks plus the possible impact. And I think it's time that we start a discussion on how to prepare for these risks. Okay, there may be unknown unknowns, but you have to work, you have to exist in an atmosphere where you may have a disproportionate and asymmetric risk hitting your operations. I'll start with Andrea. You are with such a large corporation, but I would generally ask about the industry as to how does the industry adjust to geopolitical risk? Because today the rate of change has accelerated. What we thought of that it would be possible in years is now happening in a matter of weeks. So, what's your perspective on that? How does industry, adjust to these shifting sands? Andrea?
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you all for this opportunity. Well, I'd like to answer your question by kind of going back in time just a little bit, Bridget. So I started in the field of risk management way back in 1999. And at that time, at least in the United States, there was a whole bunch of planning going on for Y2K. And that was like the big, everybody was so worried about, in their mind at their time, was defined as a black swan, right? This was the big unknown. Computers were not going to understand the number 2. It was going to shut down the world that we knew it. And so now fast forward in time, right, to where we are today. And we are very much in this recovery phase of a global crisis. And not to argue with you, Brajesh, but I would attest that COVID was not a black swan. That all the scientific community had been saying for years, there's going to be a global pandemic, but we didn't listen as risk planners. And I think that sometimes we can get a very myopic perspective and have blinders on and kind of tend towards the sexy, right? To look for the dramatic events. Let's focus on terrorism. This is our big risk. And we have blinders on to a huge high impact and high probability events. And as the business community, we're the ones who had to deal with all of the symptoms, right? The end game of COVID, supply chain issues that we're still dealing with supply chain issues, manufacturing issues, communication challenges. We were also interconnected. And so my hope is that we do not, that we leverage this really, really bad day and all of these lessons learned that we had from COVID. Because we learned how interconnected we are and how important that planning process is. And the only way the businesses who were successful were those who had thought through their redundancies, that knew their critical functions, and could quickly pivot and do business differently. And that's going to be the competitive edge for businesses. It's to really plan for the end game, as opposed to what's the new crisis, right? What's the Y2K of tomorrow? Don't plan for that. Plan for the end game. How are you going to deal with your vulnerabilities in the supply chain? How are you going to mass evacuate? How are you going to deal with sanitation? What is the relevant risk to your business? And I think spending some time there and seeing all the lessons learned, that is going to be the game changer for us.
Excellent points there, Andrea. You really talked about this pandemic not being exactly a black swan event, because the world has been uh, thinking that there would be a pandemic, but not preparing for it. Excellent points there. It's a new perspective. You also talked about how the world is interconnected and how things can mushroom so quickly now. But you also gave hope by saying that rather than being risk averse, as the world was about the pandemic, you can actually prepare and build resilience into your systems. Excellent points there. Uh, Prashant, taking the thread forward, the world has changed. The world has changed like never before. Here in India, we see that the digitization on a positive side, the digitization which could have taken place in like 10 years has happened in a span of months. So during the extreme lockdowns, almost everything went digital. So right from your money to your information to any kinds of logistics or services, everything, finance has gone digital. So has entertainment. Now, in this sector, I feel that the risks are very different. And as Andrea talked about interconnectedness, this digital world is about that instant interconnectedness. And with 5G, everything is going to change. The world is going to be instant all the time. Like there's going to be no latency. So this is again going to transform the world in ways which probably we yet do not understand. So what's your perspective on risk in this interconnected, booming, buzzing, instant world? How do you see risk shaping businesses and what to do about it? Prashant?
Great question, and I think it's a very high-powered panel. I've been talking across the globe in many sessions. This seems to be a really high-powered panel. So, whatever little I can talk about, I'll probably give my views, and particularly from a risk standpoint, Vijay. We know that disruption is actually sweeping through the media and entertainment industry, which is also powering the invention and rapid expansion of the new business models, which of course will lead to uncertainty about the durability of these well-established ecosystems. So, just to summarize, the business model for us is really evolving, and now the expectations are even more diverse than ever before. So, with this intensifying competition for let's say viewers or advertisers, combined with ongoing declination in subscriber base, there is a lot of pressure on top line performance for many of these media companies. And at the other end of the margin squeeze, costs are escalating. So, especially in the critical areas of content or talent. So, just to kind of manage these areas, management will absolutely find ways to cut costs. Now, the solution today is more holistic and nuanced than the simple brute force reductions that we used to have in the past. Now, what the industry requires is a new level of operational excellence, the kind of strategic expense reduction that delivers short-term results and, of course, long-term efficiencies. So, and now with the fragmentation of viewers on media platforms, advertising models are also evolving into new forms, including pragmatic, native, vertical, 360 degree addressable ads. Now, in terms of audience measurement, the key piece in the puzzle and critical to understanding consumers, that has become more complex and continues to lag. So just circling back to increase in expectations of our consumers. Just a few years ago, consumers, even like myself, we were delighted to be able to stream a movie or a TV show on multiple devices. That was candy for us. Now it's so different. The consumer expects personalized experiences across their daily lives. From mobility and financial services to communication, entertainment. So our focus is also now moving towards mitigating cyber risks. And I believe, again, in my personal opinion, that media companies need to take this, four-step, the 4P approach, which is a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, to prioritize, plan, protect, and preserve. Not to get into details on that, and I'm happy to talk about it at a later time. But I personally expect that artificial intelligence or machine learning will be leveraged by media companies to detect viewing patterns from multiple perspectives, to build personalized recommendations into consumers' digital interaction. I also think that the importance of network collaboration with distribution, I get the term frenemies, friends and enemies, will increase, which probably will be curating content relevant to the specific platform. I mean, just to close this, I think globalization is a very critical piece for media companies, and particularly those who are looking to build scale or open new markets and of course remain competitive. So we are seeing a rise of economic nationalism and the prospect of a higher trade barrier. At the same time, I think enabling digital technologies is even rendering borders less relevant. So media companies are now more open than ever to the opportunity of growing their international operations. I'll take a pause there and probably.
Very, very pithy observations there, Prashant.
Very binary. Sorry, it's a risk-based approach, so it's always binary into either this side or the other. There's no flexibility on that.
I understand. I understand. But you made some very interesting points there. You talked about the whole innovation of the business process. Very interesting. And you talked about how AI and ML, which is working on the consumer side, can help you re-engineer your processes. So these are wonderful observations. And you also talked about how seemingly opposite entities can sort of get into network collaboration, into a win-win situation. And you interestingly also pointed about the coming trade barriers and economic nationalism. And when everything, whom you turn to, you ask the lawyer. So I'm going to ask. Yes. I'm going to, so you say better call Saul, so I'm going to ask the lawyer about that as we see the world is transforming and there are perspectives on risk management, but a lot is happening in the legal arena, in the sense that there are countries which are suddenly banning something, somebody is allowing cryptocurrency, somebody is coming with privacy laws. European court are giving judgments on privacy, which may basically be applicable across the world. And it's again, as I said, quicksand. It's a rapidly changing environment. So, what do you think? How important is legal risk to businesses, and what can be done to mitigate it? Is it possible to mitigate? Because it's something which nation states are doing. So, is it possible to mitigate legal risk, and what's your advice on that?
Okay, so to start with, yes, there has been a lot of inconsistencies across the globe in laws, around privacy, around the other technological laws which are coming in place. Let's talk, as you were talking about cryptocurrencies, countries coming with their own currency and giving it for free. So what kind of implications that would have in future? So this inconsistency which we are seeing across the globe, in specifically if I restrict myself to the privacy laws, because the way we are moving. Privacy becomes a very key element, because personal and non-personal data we trade a lot on, and almost all the organizations, all the verticals are in a way dependent over data. So this has created a lot of complications and uncertainty for the firms operating in multiple jurisdictions. One jurisdiction plays a very good role. Okay, you are aware about the law. These are the things you are even involved in the key stakeholder to formulate a policy over there. But when you have a multiple jurisdiction, it creates a lot of issues. When you talk about mitigate, I would say that there are a few considerations one can look into, such as data mapping, origin, where it resides, have a look into it, risk management in relation to collection and preservation of data. Be aware about, train your personnel about data privacy regulations and transfer protocol, transfer strategy, and finally expert advice on privacy and transfer. One has to get it where a specific jurisdiction is concerned. So one is awareness about which country are you operating, or which country, which jurisdiction your organization is entering into. So have little more detailed analysis over what policy things are there, because if we talk about data breaches, they are here to stay. Corporates need to evolve a strategy rather than, around risk management or risk governance, rather than having a strategy over risk avoidance, I would say. If we just pick up basic, GDPR, or let's say the pending data protection bill, which India is having, PDPR. If you look at the Finnish, it's almost like 2 to 4% of your global turnover per breach. Even GDPR has very strict, somewhere around the same this thing. If you look at Cloud Act, so every country is evolving with their own privacy laws, and the punishments are very stringent. So one has to be really aware about, not avoid, but yes, be part of consultation in the specific country and be aware about it. After that, I would say that when we talk about breaches, one has to look into the changes in the way we acquire, we process the data, the way we retain and dispose of these data. Every country has different laws around these specific points. Anybody dealing with personal data, whereas India is concerned, we have strict measures when we talk about legitimate interest, when we talk about when we talk about sovereignty. The recent example of banning Chinese app by India has been a very strict move for the first time, which actually stirred the country that okay, something like that can also happen from Indian legislation, though we are still at the nascent stage in evolving our law. So I would say that cyber security is something one has to look into. It has been gaining, a critical business consideration should be there where a cyber security is concerned. And when I talk about cyber security, and corporates and government need to understand the cost benefits, whereas cyberspace and security is concerned, I think you would be the better one to talk about security and when it comes to cyber security. I think Brijesh, you would be the one to put some light on that.
Never ask the lawyer. So she made some good points. I mean, she talked about privacy and jurisdiction and risk management perspective, and she really addressed also the elephant in the room: data breaches. The last year was a year of data breaches. As the world suddenly went digital and people started working from home, they didn't have perimeter protection, endpoint detection and response, SOC, knock, anomaly detection, nothing like that. And you straight away started logging onto your home computers where your child had been playing a game, and now you're using it for your corporate work. And this opened up everything. So the world was inside out, and this posed a huge cyber risk. If you actually look at the initial, months of COVID, then you find that lakhs of domains were, and hundreds of thousands of domains were registered in the name of COVID. The word COVID was unknown before December 2020. There was only one domain registered. I don't know why somebody registered it, but there was only one domain registered under the name of COVID. And poor Corona Bear people, they faced risk. That was really an unknown. That a virus with the same name came, and their total sales and this thing tanked. I believe that as rightfully, the thread was started by Prashant and then taken forward by Khushbu about cyber risk. I think today cyber risk is the most important existential risk facing business. So if you look at countries' perspectives around risk, you find that till 10 years back, people don't talk of cyber. They talk about cyber risks as one of the risks. But around 5 years back, they've understood that this is existential. This has changed reporting structures. Every cyber is now reporting directly to board. It's no more reporting to IT or no more reporting to other formations. It's directly reporting to board. Um, what also has happened is the evolution of a great criminal underground, and this criminal underground is very well involved. It is sophisticated. It is well resourced. It is motivated. And the worst thing is that it collaborates in real time. So today, if you want to, let's say, buy a service to have, to run ransomware on some corporation or run a distributed denial of service attack, you can simply go to the dark web and purchase these services. Now, if you look at the large bank breaches, you find that the boundaries between nation state actors and fin crime groups or cybercrime financial groups is blurring. There are these safe haven jurisdictions where you can host whatever you want. You can, run malware from their servers. And when it comes to law enforcement, you won't get any cooperation. Or there are countries which are allowing people in their jurisdiction to attack others. And this is sad. This is sad because what weapons you make can turn against you. If you look at the shadow what was that? Uh, there was a breach of the tools from NSA, and they were like the Eternal Blue and other exploits. What happened then? Once these exploits were out, somebody combined some kind of ransomware with it, and the whole UK's NHS was down with WannaCry. Uh, After that came NotPetya. See, it's a small release of uh, tools by a hacker group called Shadow Brokers. And these people just release these tools in out. First, they tried to sell it, but then they couldn't sell it. So these are nation state tools. These are like nuclear weapons. And see, look at the effects. They were devastating. The whole UK's national health system was down because it was working on some old Windows Vista or Windows 2000 computers which were end of life cycle, they were not patched. Then came the NotPetya attack by March with the same vulnerability, and Maersk was literally wiped off. So, one of the shipping terminals in India, which handled around 18% of our shipping traffic, it went offline for 3 months. Imagine taking off the taking off the shipping traffic of this proportion for 3 months. It is something in warfare nobody would have been able to achieve. You would have had to bomb out of smithereens, a whole port. But here you have things which can suddenly stop operations of countries. Uh, 2 days back, I heard some news that in Florida, some hacker got into the water supply systems and tried to poison them. So it's really becoming very asymmetric and very dangerous. And Andrea gave me some hope there by saying that okay, there are black swans, but there are methods to prepare for this. So I understand that risk management is developing into a whole science, and there are people who have real life experience in dealing with these, and we need these specializations more and more. In fact, I'll turn back to Andrea, and you initially spoke about supply chain disruptions. So how does the world handle supply chain disruptions? Because risk can be from anywhere. It can be legal risk in terms of trade barriers. It can be a pandemic. It can be a natural disaster. So how does one ensure resilience in supply chains? And
Thanks, Brajesh. And I want to say I totally agree with you about the cyber threat being one of the biggest threats that businesses have to deal with. And I hope it's not 2 years from now, Brajesh, and where it's almost the world is as shocked as they were dealing with COVID, because this is a known risk. People have been talking about it. And the only way that really, that as a business, as a government, as the community at large, right, is that we have to have this almost a culture of preparedness. What highlighting, right, is that if everybody in the company has to be aware of the risks and what are the vulnerabilities. And supply chain, as we saw in 2020, impacted everyone. And that you could see the growing disparity in economics on who was able to get supplies, quicker than others. And it should not, when this is a global crisis, one should, and I know this is very like Pollyanna for me to think this way, that we should have said, here's our global priorities and how we're going to solve this global problem. But of course, that's not what we did. Everybody dealt with it individually. Businesses went out and did side deals to figure out how they could get supplies faster. They did manufacturing deals with other countries that they hadn't done business with. And so you saw this growing disparity of people getting resources. And we will continue down that path unless we take the pause, like I suggested before, and really look at what are these vulnerabilities for me as the individual, for me as the business, and then obviously how I fit into the larger picture. Because we will not be able to have a resilient culture. We won't have resiliency unless we're looking at it holistically as the whole community in this planning. Because I could be a business, I could think through all of my risks, and I can think through where I'm vulnerable. I can have secondary vendors, and I could be a shipping company, and I could have a cyber hack, and I could have somebody else I could use to ship my goods. But if the entire supply chain is impacted, it doesn't matter. And so it's the importance of making sure that we don't lose these lessons learned as the holistic, like country, company, and we have to work together. Because that's when we started into the recovery phase of COVID, right? We could see the light when we all started to get together. The scientific community came together and said, how are we going to get through this? We had the business community working to get the vaccines out, getting them produced. And but it took so long because we were not working together. And so I know this is old school, and especially when, Prashant's talking about all the progression of the industry and focus on 5G and everything, but it goes back to the planning process. We have to sit and work together as the whole community. And I got my roots in crisis planning, working for the nonprofit world, and that's where I'm wearing my Red Cross pin. And we have to think about, as the business world keeps moving forward, we cannot forget all of our vulnerable populations that are impacted by it, because that disparity continues to grow. And if they don't have the training to use the technology, they don't have the situational awareness to know their risks, we won't be a resilient culture.
Wonderful points there. Like you really gave a new perspective by saying that we have to do things holistically. There's a solution there. Like Prashant also indicated that there has to be wider collaboration without immediate self-interest, and that's a good way to look at the world today. Because if there is something which is bigger than everybody, then we'll have to get together to face it. Prashant, taking the thread forward, I feel that technological risk and even innovation is a huge risk, and companies which are becoming increasingly digital, how do they cope with technological risk? Because technological risk is something which can have very large impact in a very small time, and there can be an innovation which can render the existing business model of any company nugatory within minutes. So how do you prepare for, or what's your advice for the corporates to prepare for technological risk?
Wow. So, I mean, really, interesting discussions and a huge learning for myself also in this session. I really loved the point that you made, Bridget, that the CIO needs a seat on the table. It's no more a security role that's called as the guards, guns, and the geeks. So it's really essential that the CIO position or security position has that seat on the table, so that risks can be interpreted or explained better to the businesses. Andrea made an interesting point that we have to make sure that we have a resilient process. If not, then the businesses are never going to be successful. And I think with that, I have a very unconventional model. We are basically going back from, let's say, to give you a hypothetical example, getting onto combination logs or biometric logs and stuff like that. We are going back to basically lock and key device and thinking that that's basically the safest way to deal with situations right now. Particularly, if you're looking at last 1 year, it's completely told us hundreds of times that we really don't have time to be complacent. Times are changing, definitely they're changing, and we need to now really focus on a very seamless integrated response. Now, these unprecedented times, leading to changes to the core of functioning, I basically have a term coined as the 3 Ws, which we can call workforce, workspace, and workplace. It's a tongue twister, but I still managed to say all of the three in the same word. So, the definition of a workforce or a workspace or a workplace has absolutely changed. Today, in this work from home environment, no matter how strong controls we have in the offices, when you're working from home, your household maid has access to your laptop, listening to all your video calls, and so I also believe these are also some of the vulnerabilities that we need to look at in a very unconventional way. Now, when I mention about these 3 Ws, they have actually highlighted the importance of technology. But these in turn have also resulted in kind of exposing more vulnerabilities to us. Now, to address these, we have to be ready to be flexible and have clarity over communication. There are other risks that have re-emerged. Insider threat, behavior-related risk, and also convergence to cyber threat that you rightly mentioned earlier. And again, going back to the unconventional approach, I would like to maybe visit a recent example on how one physical security concern could lead to a massive cyber threat. And mentioning about the U.S. Capitol breach that we saw rioters, getting into that. People would possibly look at it as a physical security risk. I know, people in our industry would never look at it as a physical security risk. When the rioters are inside the office, in a conventional scenario, what are we doing? We are protecting our networks, we have access control, we have turnstiles, we are making sure all these physical barriers are in place to prevent a cyber breach. But in an environment similar to the Capitol breach, people were inside a very sensitive workplace and they had access to the networks. They could have just plugged in a device and hacked into the network there. They, people who possibly rushed out in panic, they may have left their workstations exposed, not locked, and which could also mean that sensitive information would be on the screens, which thousands of people were able to kind of see at that point in time. So, I'm just revisiting all these vulnerabilities that it's no longer a physical security breach. This translates into a very sensitive, high-profile cybersecurity breach, and maybe translating it to an Indian scenario where you have these unions trying to protesting and barging into offices. It's the same scenario. Employees would just leave their desks and evacuate the building, which basically exposes their computer screens, networks, and going back, even your housemaid can plug in a thumb drive into your computer on the pretext of cleaning your desk, and so I think it's time to revisit the conventional vulnerabilities than to kind of look at more technical stuff. And again, going back to Andrea's point, in order to mitigate this, we have to think beyond a standard risk management approach. We definitely need to have a robust risk intelligence process in place, and it's all stitching together, Vijay. Unless you have that seat on the table for the CIOs, nothing ever is going to work. So I think I'll summarize with that part.
And just, I'd like to highlight, Prashant, if I could, just like how important that is, that seat at the table, but then the open-mindedness to realize, there might be other people missing from that table. And I appreciated when I got to work with you, you were always asking yourself that question, who's missing? What aren't we thinking about? And making sure that that seat's there, because it's just, they're missing from the conversation right now. And it's so important. You're so right, Prashant. You're so right.
I mean, we are as strong as our weakest link. So if we don't have that seat, that's the weakest link. The businesses are never going to understand risk, and particularly our operational risk gambit with people, processes, systems, and technology. If we're missing these four parts, I think we are missing the leader.
Sorry.
Yeah, your points are welcome always. Prashant, you actually give a new perspective by saying that we used to think that, okay, time has come where cyber risk can cause physical risks. But you said something very nice, that even in a physical disturbance, there can be a cyber risk. I mean, even as a law enforcement officer, I haven't thought of that. So it's something we'll need to keep in mind. Thank you for that. And you both also talked about an open-mindedness in trying to solve problems. If you look at studies in psychology, there's this phenomenon called groupthink, wherein people start thinking very similar and they start agreeing with each other more. And in fact, a group takes more risky decisions than a set of disparate individuals. So it's very important to have a fresh perspective and a holistic perspective. Cycling back to the lawyer, now, even after everything, if actually a breach happens, like if corporation has a large data breach, then what do they do? Plus your advice on handling data. I mean, give us something concrete now. We won't charge you for that.
So in case the breach happens, as I said, it's different for each country. So basic standard, yes, everybody has whether to report, not to report. There are mandates in few jurisdictions where you have to report the breach. You need to have a proper standard where your breach notice has to be issued. You need to inform the data protection officer in that specific country. So as I said, that this is privacy laws are at the very nascent stage, and one has to understand which country are you operating. So basic is, yes, I would say that I think Prashant and Andrea would agree with you, and you would also agree with me that have a breach notice with key elements in place, get an internal plus external team to have forensics done and have entire thing in place, because in order for you to fight in future, or let's say one side is that okay, privacy and breach and save yourself, the other one is that you go against the person who has attacked you. So in order for a lawyer to have ingredient, you need to have evidences, admissible evidences, because each country has a different aspect whereas electronic evidences are concerned. And that's very specific about admissibility of electronic evidences. So even if that happens and you want to go ahead, if you have not saved your evidences properly, creates an issue. So yes, I would say that these are the few basic things. And if you talk about data flows, the interruptions in data flows will create a lot of issues for the companies who have invested in these verticals. They would I mean, what one has to do in order to mitigate might have data centers locally, hire more lawyers, more technological people, have CISOs in place. I was coming up with, yes, have specific. I'm talking about the local jurisdictions. Navigate, in order to navigate the regulatory landscape, you need to have innovation and technology or AI in place. But in order to have that in compliance with, I would just give a very basic example. Let's talk about drug and vaccine research. Now, these researchers need heavy data. So in order for you, and when you talk about medical data or personal data, these are very critical information. These data sets are very critical information in almost all the countries. Even India, even GDPR recognizes medical data as a very critical data. So you will face with new barriers, to acquire these large data sets. Different country, different laws which you're working on. So I would say that yes, I just give 5 pointers for all the companies who have international footprint to look into what exactly one has to determine. I would say that assess. Okay, let's start with that. Engage with regulatory and policymakers to address digital economy concerns. Contribute, in the direction of technological policy rather than something which restricts. So be part of that
policy making, because as I said that it's at the nascent stage, it's still building, so why not help them out? The second is, manage your shift towards more localized technology. Save your data while maintaining globalized operations. So I would say that have your globalized operation, but at the same time have directional shift towards localized technology, data centers in local, or pick up those things. You need to understand the present challenges which your company might face where a supply chain is concerned, and if that supply chain is the basis is data, then need to understand that where and how it can impact, which will practically have hurdles for your company. It might go standstill. So understand that and keep all those things in a futuristic way, safeguard your company on that aspect. I would just close on that, and I think Prashant and Andrea would be the better people to talk about how to mitigate when breach happens. But yes, that's about it.
No, and totally aligned with one thing that you said, Khushbu, because even for us today, consumer demands are so unrealistic. Maybe for the lack of better term, I said unrealistic, because you're talking about protecting personal data on one side, and then the consumers, when you switch on your OTT platform, the consumer expects that media companies should know their preferences and what kind of genre they want to watch and when they want to watch. But at the same time, they don't want to share personal data or personal information. So how is that expectation going to kind of bridge the gap? I mean, it's pretty difficult, for media companies or any other company to kind of match those expectations. So very valid point, which
Absolutely. I think that non-personal data and encryption part, where there's non-personal data, there's one new framework coming of non-personal data in this concern. European countries also had European Union had something to do with non-personal data and how to trade with it, encrypt it, and aggregated data can be churned and how it can be done. So that process there has to be a little more. I think I would say that global standards rather than having a localized one. That's my suggestion. That it's high time that we need to have a global standard for at least for non-personal data or for aggregated data churning, because your AI is concerned, or where giving better user interface to your user. In areas in almost all the verticals, be it automobiles, be it OTT platforms, be it health sector or transport, anything. One has to have better user interface, and in order to have that, technology is the key, and the basis is, yes, large data sets.
Yeah. And then revisiting my point made earlier, that I mean, this all comes with a cost, but the consumer, and just for us to try to be competitive, we are trying to reduce costs here, and at the same time, the customer wants everything. So it's a pretty catch-22 situation, and that's going to be ongoing. I don't see any end or any resolution to bridging the gap here.
Sure. Any closing remarks, Andrea?
Just that, for every business out there, really reflects on the lessons learned of the past year. And if there is something that you are not doing good on a good day, you will not do it better on a bad day. So really look at that and have a hard eye to it and focus on your end game, right? Where do you want to be? And that whatever the crisis is, if it is a cyber hack, if it's a natural disaster, it's another pandemic, how are you going to be able to not be vulnerable and be able to keep your business going?
To sum up, it's been a wonderful discussion, and we thought that it would continue for half an hour, but it's almost an hour we have been talking, and I think if it goes on, we can talk for hours like this. But some excellent learning points there. We emphasized on, as a group, we emphasized on the interconnected nature of the world, and we also talked about how opposites can collaborate, whether it's something larger. And we also spoke about having a holistic perspective. Prashant, you spoke about the 3 Ws of how the workplace, and workspace has totally changed in the last year. Khushbu talked about data as being inflammable oil, and there's a good set of learnings here that as businesses, as individuals, as corporations, as nation states, nobody's untouched from this huge risk, which is again an unknown, and also a ray of hope where Andrea pointed out that there are things which are like we are blindsided. That the risk of pandemic was expected, but people didn't actually hope in their hearts that it would happen. And there are ways to prepare for this. We have to look beyond our own boundaries and perimeters, and look at the world as a whole, and think how and where we can collaborate so that we can mitigate the harmful effects of any risks that we would be facing as humanity, rather than as as individuals, as families, or as corporations. Excellent discussion, guys. Thank you so much. It's been very enriching, and we should do this often. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.